Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. We'll be talking about engaging your lawmakers on the climate crisis. So I guess we can just go ahead and start to introduce ourselves and our organizations. I'm Alexandra Grayson. I am with Defend Our Future.
Hi, everyone. My name's Layla Green. I am also with Defend Our Future today.
And my name is Roshan Selden, and I'm with Our Climate.
So I guess we can go to the next slide, just tell you a bit more about Defend and Our Climate.
Okay, so today we want to set some ground rules just for our discussion. So we want this to be an open space. If you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat, or if you have a comment. Towards the end of our session, we will be opening up the space for questions. So if you want to save them until the end, that's perfect. We'll answer them then. And yeah, we just want this to be a space where you feel comfortable.
Yes, I don't know if the slide is coming up with our organization's information, but I can just go ahead and say what Defend is about. Defend's a nonprofit, nonpartisan project of Environmental Defense Fund, and Defend empowers young people who are interested in advancing environmental justice, clean energy, and climate solutions that protect our world for future generations.
And Our Climate is also an organization that really wants to mobilize young folks in lobbying for equitable and science-based climate policies. And most of our work takes place on a state level.
Okay, so now getting into our session, does anyone know why we should engage with our lawmakers? Feel free to drop it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. Yeah, great. So there's some answers from Marco and Mackenzie saying they work for us and they hold power. Joe says they get legislation passed. Thank you so much. We can go into the next slide. Yeah, Kylie says they hold power and build connections. Perfect. So just our replies to this is that our lawmakers work for us, and if you're their constituent, then they're looking to see what local issues are important to you. So it's really important to reach out to them and let them know what's important to you. Also, our lobbying can influence policy, so we can create our own change by engaging with our lawmakers. And if you don't make your own voice heard, then someone else will, and they might have a different agenda. So it's always important to engage with your lawmakers if you can, and let them know what's important to you. Okay, so how do we engage with our lawmakers? We can just go to the next slide with this one. So there's a couple of methods of engagement. You can use social media posts by tagging your representatives. A lot of representatives have been getting very active on social media, so it's a great way to reach out with them. And it's fairly fast too. You can also use office visits, and these office visits can be with either the staffers or the representatives themselves if you're lucky. You can also engage them with published pieces such as op-eds and LTEs, LTEs being letters of the editor. And this is an example from Defend Our Future. One of our campus ambassadors was published in the Des Moines Register, which is great. You can also use phone calls and public events to engage with representatives. So in terms of engaging with them, there's a couple of tips that are important to note. You want them to be able to connect with you and what you're asking. So by doing this, you should focus on issues that the lawmaker is passionate about. So that way you can actually connect and have a productive conversation. Along with that, you should understand that after one interaction, an elected official might not be a climate champion. You know, it takes building a relationship. It takes a minute to convince, lawmakers. So you want to build a relationship with them, really. Also, you should make sure that you're conveying your ask and priority in the best way possible. So you should ask open-ended questions so that way you can actually hear from their office and hear the work that they've done. And along with that, you should try and contact the office through multiple mediums. So by utilizing an office visit, maybe a phone call or social media, and an opinion piece. And then along with that comes story crafting. So story crafting is really important when it comes to reaching out to an office or having an office meeting. So there's a couple of different stories. So the first story is the story of self. This is why you care about an issue, what unique perspective, story, or identity you have. Then there's the story of us, and this is the connection to the district and the elected officials. So it's how you connect your story to them, and then the story of now, which is what you really want to offer to them, which is the solutions and the open asks that you have on a certain issue. So you want to use all three of these stories when you're engaging with an office so that they know who you are and where you're coming from, know how it affects them, and know what they can do to help you.
So for setting up a meeting with your lawmaker, the first step is to reach out to them to get it scheduled. And so you can do that by either calling or emailing them. And their contact information is all available online. If you just simply look up their name, it will all be on their personal website. Another important part about this, though, is to make sure to contact their legislative aide as well. So legislative aides, they kind of handle the schedule and logistics of a lawmaker. And so when a lawmaker gets really busy, a legislative aide will help schedule their calendar, go through their emails. And so they're really someone that you want to contact as well. So if neither the legislative aide or the lawmaker responds back in 2 to 3 days, that is okay. Lawmakers have very, very busy schedules. And so we recommend that you follow up both on the email and through phone. And I know sometimes it can feel like you're being pushy when you follow up and when someone hasn't responded. But again, like as we've said, this is their job to hear the voices of their constituents. And if they get busy, it's just not personal. So it's really good to take an extra step there to get that meeting scheduled. And then after you have this experience, something really great about activism is the snowball effect. So then you'll be able to teach others how they can contact their legislator and get meetings set up themselves. We're probably, yes. So the meeting, we're probably good on the next slide, Jonathan. So just a few preparation tips and tricks. The first step is pretty obvious. You need to recruit folks to lobby with you. There is power in numbers here. And then once you have people who are going to go in the meeting with you, the first thing you should do is assign meeting roles. And there are a few different important roles when you meet with a lawmaker. One, to have a note taker to record what's going on in the meeting is really important, because that way, if a lawmaker commits to something or has a specific question, you'll have a tangible record of that. And so you know what to follow up with, whether that's providing extra information or holding a lawmaker accountable to their promise. It's really good to have a written record of what actually happened during the meeting. Another role is a facilitator. These are kind of folks who kind of introduce the group, thank the lawmaker for taking the time to meet, and that's the role they fill. You then have askers, which are very important. These folks are the ones who actually make the ask of your meeting. So whether you want a lawmaker to co-sponsor a bill or vote in favor of a bill, having a direct ask is the most important part of the meeting. And so that's its own role. You then have storytellers, which kind of bring these issues onto a personal level and share why they're passionate about the specific thing that you're going to talk about, why it's important, why the lawmaker should care. And so, as it's been said, the storytellers are really important for developing that relationship with the lawmaker. And then lastly, you should have a timekeeper and set up times on your agenda, because meetings will usually be about 15 minutes, and 15 minutes goes by really, really quickly. Sometimes lawmakers can kind of go on. And so it's really important that you have someone who can move the group along so that you can get to your ask and not miss out on anything because you simply didn't have time. So another good preparation trick is knowing your facts. It's always, always good to come into a meeting prepared and knowledgeable about the issue you're going to talk about, because it's very likely that your lawmakers will have questions for you. That being said, no one's expecting you to be the best expert in the world on the issue. And so if a lawmaker asks you a question about the bill that you don't know, that is okay. And all you have to do is just say that you'll follow up on that information after the meeting. And so again, that's kind of why a note taker is important, to write those things down. On the flip side, it's also important to know facts about the lawmaker you're meeting with. Are they a climate champion? Have they voted for environmental bills in the past? Are they more of a swing vote? Are they a current co-sponsor? When you kind of know more about your lawmaker, it helps you strategize what asks you're trying to do. Maybe if someone's a really swing vote on environmental issues, it's less likely they'll sign on as a co-sponsor, but maybe you could ask them to vote for a bill and they may be more likely to do that. Another important part that's pretty standard in meeting with lawmakers is preparing a one-pager. And one-pagers are just a short summary of a bill and the ask that you have. And it's usually standard when you go into a meeting, whether it's in person or virtual, to send that one-pager beforehand via email, or put a link in like the Zoom chat, just to make sure that they can go into this having knowledge about the bill that you're talking about. Then again, as I've said, the asks of the meeting are really the most important part, because it's why you're there. We meet with our lawmakers to make change and make sure that they act in a way that's based off of what their constituents want. And so the best way we do that is by preparing a specific ask that they can follow through on. And it's really good to have it very specified. And then if they do agree, let's say they agree to become a co-sponsor, it's important that you follow up and you make sure that they're actually doing that. And if they don't do it, that's when you can take to social media or meet with them again. Again, having an ask is very important. And then the last part is just practice, practice, practice. It'd be good to run it through the agenda with your folks that you've recruited to lobby with you. But again, take it with a grain of salt. You don't want to come into this meeting with like a memorized script. You do want to make it personal. So when I say practice, I more so mean plan out what you're going to say. But again, you're not trying to memorize a specific script. And I think we can take it to the next slide.
Awesome. So I'll be discussing what you do a bit more during and then following up. So what Rashawn said was completely on par with a lot of what's in this slide, but just knowing what you want to say, so being prepared. Offering to serve as a resource, asking good questions, being a listener, and having an ask is important, as stated. Next slide. Here's some quick do's and don'ts that you could memorize or just jot down. Don't project negativity. I know it can be difficult, especially if you're working with an office that may not have the same point of view as you. But just know that there's some common ground that you can reach, and that your goal is to find that and to make sure that they feel swayed, and to start building a relationship where they will want to do things that you're asking them to do. Don't be controlled by your own biases. So kind of on that same point, don't mansplain your subject or topic. Congressional staffers are people who know a lot of different things about a lot of different subjects. So, they may not be environmentalists by training, but definitely don't mansplain your topics to them. And also don't interject or interrupt. Definitely, as was stated on the last slide, just make sure you're listening. And so sort of on par with some of these things are some good do's. Do start a dialogue. You have to be able to converse with them about things that they're doing or things that the federal government's doing that's impacting their district. If you're a constituent or impacting, or even if you're not a constituent, that's impacting their district, that always will get them, and that's impacting their constituents and the things that they care about. And starting a dialogue also helps us build that relationship. Following up is important, being authentic, talking about your own experiences and the experiences that you've come across. And being apolitical, sticking to the facts and personal stories is really important. Next slide. Okay, so in terms of following up, you want to remind them who you and your organization are, why you met, what was discussed during the meeting, and emphasize any action items that came up, if any. So if you ask them to sponsor a bill and they want to look at it some more, sending them one pagers and discussing that. And then also just saying that you want to stay engaged and serve as a resource to their office. And following up within 1 week, ideally 1 day, but yeah, it's definitely key that you remain in touch with the office and not run and hide after the meeting. Yeah, so some other best practices, send staff pertinent aides or the congressperson themselves a thank you or email letter, and keep them posted about future events that they can participate in. So you can invite them to town halls, university meetups, and things of that nature. That's just a part of building that relationship, and reminding them of why your organization is a resource for them, and the expertise that you all have and things of that nature. So are there any questions, comments? I don't know if there have been any going through the chat. Ooh, Lisa, go ahead with your question.
Hi, thank you so much for this. It's super helpful. I guess I have a couple questions. One is like, can any kind of like group of a few people do this, or is it better to be like an official, like, group with like a title and a whatever, social media and all that? And I guess my other question is, how do you have time for stories when you only have 15 minutes?
That's a good question. I can start. I personally think you can go with just yourself. You don't have to be affiliated with the organization. Every time I've met with a congressional member or a lawmaker, even at a city or state level, it's been with a group. And I mean, you all could just call yourselves something, honestly. Like, this is me and my friends, and we're interested in this, or we're working toward lobbying for this. But regardless, I think in those scenarios, I think it's best if you, are their constituent. I'm sorry. Especially if you're the constituent and you're not affiliated with an organization. If you're not affiliated with an organization, it may be harder to get a meeting with someone that's not your representative personally. And how do you have time for stories? Maybe keeping things like short, like, okay, I'm meeting with somebody to promote EPA funding for fiscal year 2022. EPA funding has helped clean up this park near my house, for example, or could help clean up, or yeah. So I think just making small notes like that can be a good way to include stories, and maybe adding some personal tidbits about how it's impacted your health or things like that, or whatever the story is. But making it kind of 1-2 sentence stories, I would say.
Yeah, I totally agree with Alexandra, and that you only have 15 minutes, so you're not expected to like share your whole life story or what brought you to climate justice, but again, maybe like 1 or 2 minutes of this is just like your own personal connection, and keeping it brief. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. That's really helpful. I feel like storytelling is like this big, intimidating thing. So just like reframing it as like 2 sentences is actually really awesome.
And I also think another thing is like you don't need the most like crazy personal connection. Like your own house doesn't have to like burn down for you to like care about the environment. I think just being like a young folk concern for the future of the planet is like legitimate enough of a story. So I wouldn't put too much pressure on it.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, of course. Mackenzie?
Thanks. This information is so helpful. I just have two questions. One, in formulating your ask, what is an open-ended question exactly, and why is it the most strategic tool for forming the ask? Do you have an example of what an open-ended question can be? And second, one of the things that discourages me about talking to my lawmakers is that I'm interested in so many environmental issues and fixing so many environmental issues. I'm from the Pacific Northwest, and so we have a lot of marine environmental issues, but also climate change is a huge problem. So I'm really concerned about reaching out to my lawmakers and having them get super annoyed with me, and that's been a block that's prevented me from going to them. Do you have to commit to one issue as an activist who's going to be lobbying your lawmakers? Cool. That's awesome that you're also from the Pacific Northwest, West Coast, Best Coast. Thank you.
I don't know. I could take that just to start. I think you can come in with multiple asks. As someone said, and as Layla was saying, your representatives work for you at the end of the day. If you care about a lot of things, they have to listen and will take action, especially if there is already legislation going through. I would say you don't have to just have one ask. I think there are so many issues that we need to tackle at once, and these are people, the staffers and the representatives are covering 1,000,000,001 topics and policy areas. They can definitely cover the gamut of climate change, and I think we have to. And if you do too, I think you should definitely express all your concerns.
Yeah, I would love to follow up on that. I think that, as you're building relationships with lawmakers, I think maybe you can introduce yourself and like your primary concerns and your primary interests. And as you continue to develop that relationship, you can go into the more detailed interests in the more niche things, just so while you're developing that relationship, you guys can connect on something initially that maybe they're interested in. And then in terms of an open-ended question, I think one question that our organization, Defend Our Future, we'd like to ask is just what have they done in terms of climate policy, especially with the new administration, what they've done. So that's kind of an example. I don't know if Rashan has anything else to add.
What I was gonna add is like there are just so many environmental issues that we care about, and it's like great to see you so excited, but I think when you're meeting down for a specific meeting, it's good to really focus on one thing. But that being said, if you're passionate about activism, what that means is like you can just have multiple meetings and you can still totally tackle all those issues one by one. And I really think you will. So
Thank you, everyone.
Of course. Benjamin, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I guess I was sort of wondering when to know when just like not to bother speaking to a specific congressperson, or because like in Michigan, my congressional representative is extremely hostile to climate change reform, and we're pretty sure in the district that he's like collaborating with Ukrainian oligarchs to like turn the country into a theocracy. And Michigan's kind of weird in that, so I guess my point is like, when do you know that's, obviously I have an extreme example, but when do you know that it's best to just it's just not even worth investing in a relationship with a lawmaker at all?
That's a really good question. So I haven't had a bad experience with the lawmaker personally, where I felt like we couldn't agree on anything or connect on anything in terms of environmentalism. But I think once you've reached out to an office or once you've had a meeting and they haven't been responsive, they don't seem to connect with you on anything, I feel like that's kind of an indicator that maybe it's not your best bet to speak with them anymore. I'm not sure because I haven't had bad experiences. I don't know if Rashan has anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And I think what it comes down to is maybe trying to strategize your time and resources most wisely. So I'm in Seattle, which is like really progressive. So I'm kind of lucky in that count. But when there's certain bills that are getting passed, we oftentimes don't meet with the lawmakers who are really against climate change because the likelihood of them changing their entire platform is probably really small, and they're probably taking money from like but the people that we like to target are the swing votes, are people who might be hesitant towards climate policies, but there's still more of a chance that they would vote in favor of them. And so maybe I would say to you, if there are other lawmakers in your district who are more moderate, I would just meet with them instead and not waste your time with someone who's like really, really against climate policies. That being said, if they're all really against climate policies, I am sorry, that's unfortunate. But yeah.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I feel like you shouldn't subject yourself to be like berated or like not treated nicely during a meeting. What I will like, I personally had a bad experience, or a not the best experience, in a meeting with a lawmaker at a state level who was just like, who cares about climate change? There's so many other issues that concern my district. I was like, yes, we get that. And then we just had to explain it in a different way and reframe it. I think part of the challenge that we have is to think of new ways to communicate the issue. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I guess I would just say that. Just think of creative ways to frame the issue in a way that they would care about it, or a way that's relatable to them. You know, a lot of people on the Republican side who've been previously hostile toward like climate scientists and whatnot are starting to, you know, learn that, okay, this does impact farmers in my district and it impacts rural communities as well. So just reframing it in a way that may be relevant to them and may really hit home for them is also important. And if that's just not possible, then honestly, like, run for office. So yeah.
I love that point. If there's like maybe an environmental infrastructure bill that like could create good paying jobs, like those are all things that I think what Alexandra was saying that could reframe the issue, that creates incentives for a lawmaker to pass something when they might not have.
Yeah, are there any more questions? Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
I guess for inspiration, I guess my question is like how to kind of like find good things to like go to our lawmakers about, just like stay informed on, you know, like what we can do for a specific ask, like, you know, pass this bill or whatever. And then I guess some like examples for like what the asks could be. I know you mentioned like co-sponsoring or, you know, just voting for. And I was wondering if there's any others you'd like to add to that, or any just like stories of your own experiences. I'd love to hear some of those.
Yeah. I think aside from co-sponsoring and things of that nature, hmm, well, to keep abreast with those sorts of things, I would say I subscribe to like relevant committees, like email listservs, so I know like when certain committees are introducing certain types of legislation. So like how science, like the science committees on both ends for federal government, and just keeping abreast with that and reading the news. It's a little exhausting sometimes, but just doing that and keeping track with like what the press releases that come out of personal offices. Um, Social media also helps in terms of knowing what bills are coming down the pike and what people should be co-sponsoring. I would say some other asks are like sometimes Congress people circulate dear colleague letters. So I'm trying to explain it. It's sort of like a for example, people there are people who are in Congress who are not on appropriations committees who want to see certain amounts of fundings for certain agencies. So it's like, okay, I want the NSF to get $10 million. I'm not on the appropriations committee, and neither are 50 something other people. So we'll sign around a dear colleague letter to encourage our friends on the appropriations committees and nudge them to do so. So seeing if there are any of those going around is important. Lots of coalitions to join to get abreast with those, but that's what I would suggest.
Yeah, I think social media is a great place for kind of keeping updated with the session. Um, and I think specific accounts you should look for are like local environmental organizations, because they'll be posting about which are the like key bills that they're focusing on the session. Um, yeah, and so I would say that's a great resource to reach out to. And I also do think getting lawmakers to vote in support of a bill or co-sponsor or against a bill that would harm the environment, I think those really are some of the most important asks anyway. So I wouldn't worry about like, yeah, getting crazy with it. Those are really like direct ways of pushing bills forward. Also, I know like this hasn't come up, but one time I was meeting with the lawmaker and he was like kind of like going on and on about some irrelevant stuff, but just like draining all the time in the meeting. So I would say if that happens to any of you, like don't be afraid to be like, oh, like thank you, and like just kind of like cut in and be like, since we only have like 5 more minutes, we'd really like to get to the ask portion of this, just in case that happens to any of y'all.
So to answer the question in the chat, Lisa asked, what does the session mean and what times of the year are best for reaching out? The session is a 2-year period in Congress. So we're in the 117th session now. And it just started. Yeah, this year. And it starts every 2 years. So the next session will start in 2023 at the beginning of the year. I would say the best time to reach out would be as soon as possible. People have different strategies when it comes to it. So like reaching out to new members of Congress to target them, or targeting people who previously didn't vote for a bill that you're interested in, and maybe reintroduce this Congress. Now is important because they're determining the budget for a lot of federal agencies. So around the time where they're figuring out the budget is a good time if you're interested in that sort of thing too. But anytime is a good time, I would say.
And I think also the session will depend if you're lobbying on a state or federal law.
Oh, you can go ahead. It's fine.
Say, Kylie just asked, how do you navigate a meeting if it gets off topic? Again, I would just like not be afraid to be direct about it. Be like, in the interest of time, we'd really like to move on to this portion. And that's, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that method. Or even just kind of like say like your priorities again or your asks, like reiterate why you're there, just so they, you know, remember, okay, this is what we're supposed to be talking about.
I also think sometimes lawmakers, if you ask a question, they kind of might dance around it. And I think it's really good to ask yes or no, just so you can have like direct confirmation of like what they're promising. Because sometimes they'll be like, oh, yeah, like I agree, that's important. So it kind of like shows their support, but without putting a responsibility on them to like actually commit to doing something. So I like, yeah, I think just a lesson we can take here is just like not beating around the bush.
Are there any other questions? Yeah, okay, so some stories. Yeah, so I guess the two that just came up was Sean and um, Lisa. You could anyone could chime in, I feel like, just to talk about your successful experiences lobbying. I don't know if anyone wants to start. I could speak to one of my first experiences lobbying if you want to convince your friends. We were lobbying at the state and local level. This was when I was in like high school for a styrofoam ban to be passed, and it was successful eventually. Took 2 years. I joined the second year, and so we got it passed at that point. So yeah, I don't know if anyone else has any other interesting stories, but I know that there'll be a second session that they could possibly get into that and then Mackenzie's question as well. So yeah, that'll start in a few minutes. But cool, thank you all for being here. I guess we can hand it off to the new presenters and the next presenters for the next session. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I guess, wait, my last question maybe is like, any tips for if they're saying no or they're not interested?
I would say be persistent if it's about scheduling the meeting, if it's about saying no to signing onto a bill. I guess we could try again next year. Some people are just really adamant about not doing things at certain times. Government, I guess, and yeah.
Can also play hardball a bit and be like, put on the pressure and be like, oh, like I'm sure like your constituents will be disappointed to know that. And then that's when you like go to social media and you like tag the senator directly in post being like they did not sign on to this bill that would like protect, I don't know, air quality. And yeah, and bad press can be a really strong motivator to get on a bill. I'll tell you that. So
All right, well, thank you all again. I think if you have any questions, you can save it for the next session, which is about to begin, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, stay tuned. I'm sure it'll be great. Thank you all again.
So a little bit about Defend Our Future and who I am. I'm Jack. I'm the campus ambassador for DOF in Northern Arizona. I'm a college student at Northern Arizona University, and I work with Defend because they're a nonprofit, nonpartisan arm of the EDF, whose role is really just trying to empower young people who are interested in advancing environmental justice, climate protection, and clean energy.
Hi, I'm Ian. I'm an Our Climate Fellow, and with Our Climate, I do state and federal policy and lobbying elected officials there. And Our Climate is just basically mobilizing and empowering young people to educate the public and elected officials about science-based, equitable climate policy solutions that build a livable world. And I'll pass it to Orly, another fellow Our Climate.
Yeah, I'm Orly. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also a fellow with Our Climate. I have a lot of experience with like talking to legislators, so I'm really excited to talk about this. Yeah. Is this a slide that we wanted to skip? Or actually, yeah, let me know what slide you want to go to.
Okay. So why engage with your lawmakers? So on the next slide, you'll see some reasons we came up with. So one of them is if you are a constituent of them, they represent you, so they obviously want to hear from you. And then another reason is you could have influence on the policy that they're passing. So sometimes with policies, they may be leaving out a specific community, and you may come from that community, and by giving your perspective, what may seem to be a fantastic bill might in reality be an awful bill. But meeting with these legislators give them a perspective. And another reason is if your voice isn't heard, then someone else's will. And this is important because oftentimes the fossil fuel industry will be meeting with these legislators, and it's important to make sure that your voice is being heard. So moving on to the next slide, we'll talk about how do we engage with our lawmakers. So on the next slide, before we answer this question, it's important to talk about what you should say while addressing these lawmakers. So Orly will talk about how to share your story.
Yeah, so there are multiple different roles that each person has in a meeting with a legislator. And one of them is the storyteller. And the storyteller tells a story that is related to the bill or amendment or the act that connects with the legislator's emotions and just persuades them to take actions. And there's a couple ways to approach storytelling. One is the story of self. So you could say like why you care about the issue, what's like a unique perspective or like story or identity that you share or that you have. Another way is to say like the story of us, like the connection to the district of the elected official, story of now. So like what is going on now and like what do we need to do? So if you are a storyteller in a meeting with a legislator, just make sure that you're connecting with their emotional side. And
so given everything Orly mentioned about your story, there's multiple ways of kind of sharing that story. So many of them are listed here. So social media posts, office visits, LTEs, phone calls, and public events. And then on the next slide, we'll go over some tips for those engagement. So like Orly said, one of the important stories is the story of us. So to really connect that to your lawmaker, and to connect it with things that the lawmaker is passionate about. And since climate change is such an intersectional issue, it's really hard to find something that is not connected to climate change and won't be affected. So some different ways to find what they're passionate about is like what laws they introduce or even what committees they're on. Those are key ways to kind of determine what they care about. And while researching, it's also important to look up how involved they are in with climate, whether they're like a extremely involved climate denier, whether they're just neutral, or whether they're a climate champion. So obviously when connecting with them, you connect to them in different ways. So if they're an outright climate denier, then you kind of just want to move them from not giving their opinion and being just, it's important to know that not at the end of the day, not everyone's going to be a climate champion. And it's just important to move everyone one step closer to being a climate champion, to have these climate solutions being passed. So then another tip is to ask open-ended questions while in a meeting. And this is extremely important so that they are talking more than you are, because you really want for them to give you more information. So when you have the next meeting with them, you can make it very focused on how you can convince them to either vote for a certain policy or vote against a certain policy. And then our third tip is to engage with the office in multiple mediums. In the last slide, we kind of addressed the different ways to contact them, but it's important to address them through all of those mediums. One, so that they know this issue is something that you're passionate about. And then two, they may focus on one medium over the other. And since every office is different, it's hard to tell. So you might as well just bombard them with all of them. So moving on to the next slide, Orly will talk about meeting with your legislator.
Yeah, so in order to meet with your legislator, we recommend calling or emailing to set up a meeting, and sometimes both, actually always both. You should be able to look up their contact information, and when you contact them, make sure to CC or just like also contact their legislative aide. By the way, a legislative aide is someone who sets up meetings and like reads through emails and helps the legislator make important decisions. So it's really crucial that the legislative aide is in the loop of what's going on. And actually, sometimes the legislator might be too busy to come to a meeting, so they would send their legislative aide on behalf. And if you've contacted them and they haven't responded after 2 to 3 days, follow up via both email and phone, and do not be afraid to be pushy. This is their job. They're supposed to represent you and listen to you. Also, like letters to the editor, strategic emails to staff, social media, events, these are still important methods of staying in touch with your legislator. And actually, once you know these steps, you can teach them to other people and organize actions as a community and engage with lawmakers, which is pretty cool. So all of my meetings with legislators in the past year have been virtual, so they will likely be virtual for the remainder of the year. And in terms of the structure of the meeting, we recommend starting with introductions and then have people share their stories, and then the ask. And just like a storyteller, an ask maker is another role in the meeting. It would just be somebody who asks the legislator to represent them in whatever way. And just make sure to ask the legislator or legislative aide if they have any questions or how you can support them, and make sure to thank them once they've arrived. And I think at the end of the meeting, it's super important to reflect on how it went so that you know what next steps you can take. So in order to prepare, decide who will be doing which role. So like who's going to take notes, who's going to be the storyteller or the ask maker, and decide like the order of who's speaking. Notes are really important. So make sure that you have that, and make sure that you have your asks prepared. This is the most important part of the meeting. Like, what are you asking the lawmaker to do? That's like the core of the meeting. And I'll pass to Jack.
Okay, so after you've spent all that time preparing and you've gotten the meeting scheduled, you're sitting down with your lawmaker. Here are just kind of some best tips of how to keep prepared and just to really just stay on your toes. So first and foremost, you already have your agenda, you know what your ask is, and just really have that on you and keep that in mind, which pretty much just means like, once you get in there, just really know what you want to say. That way, you're not tripping over your words trying to figure out, how to get to your point. A big thing too is to offer to serve as a resource to them. That way it's not just like a one-ended conversation where, you are asking a lot from your lawmaker, and they feel like you're not willing to be a resource. So definitely highlight what your organization or what you can do for them in the future if they really want to fight for climate justice. And lastly, kind of just personalize your issue. So talk about, why it's important to you personally, your community personally, and especially their district, which really just means to keep it local. So for example, if your ask is about a federal bill about climate, really just try to localize it so that the lawmaker understands, this is pertinent to my district and this is something I should care about. And ask plenty of questions. Some brief do's and don'ts, just don't be negative. It's just never a good look. And I think that ties into biases as well. So for example, if you're meeting with somebody who is a lawmaker who doesn't have a strong climate record, instead of going on the offensive, just try to keep it respectful and, project what your beliefs are without being, I guess, aggressive about it is the best way to put it. Don't mansplain your subject. And I think this can be huge because there's a good chance that your lawmaker might already know quite a bit about what you're talking about. And it's just not a good look to mansplain or talk down or condescend to a lawmaker. Don't avoid offices with opposing viewpoints, because if we want to really fight for climate justice, we're not going to win by just sticking with people who we perceive to be on our side. And don't interject or interrupt. It's just rude. But some things you can do is really just stick to the facts, those personal narratives. So don't tie it into, for example, if they're from an opposing party, don't make it about that. Start kind of an authentic dialogue, which really just means, try to keep the conversation flowing, keep it light, while still hitting all of those points that you need to hit. Keep it relevant to their community and their district. That way it doesn't feel abstract. And once again, just try to keep the conversation fluid so it doesn't feel awkward or kind of choppy with breaks or anything like that. And then following up, ideally what you should do is follow up by email or by phone if you had done that prior with their office kind of the day of or the next day, basically saying first, just thanking them for taking the time to meet with you and your team, your organization. And from there, that's really a good time to remind them who you and your organization are and, kind of refresh them about the purpose of that meeting, just so, it kind of serves as a relevant reminder to them that this is something you're consistent about and it's something that they should care about as well. In addition to that, a few weeks down the line, whatever it may be, or whenever something pertinent comes up, always offer to just invite them to any community events. So that could be town halls, any additional office visits that you want to have. Just keep engaged so they know that you're a resource that they have. And that is about it there. And then some other best practices, send, I would say within a week at the very most, again, sending that thank you email or letter. I think letters are nice because they're kind of personalized and it tells them that you wanted to put some more effort into just saying thank you. Just again, make sure to keep them posted on stuff where they can be, a value for an event. So town halls, university meetups, stuff like that. And yeah, just continue to offer yourself and your organization as a resource, because that way, they'll start coming back to you and it'll be a lot easier to reach out in the future. And with social media, no matter what community that you're in, definitely give us a follow, and you can sign up on our email list as well. And always reach out, even if, for example, with Defend Our Future, we're not on your college campus. There are always going to be virtual trainings that we're having, letter writing to the editor opportunities, stuff like that. So stay engaged with us on social media, because we always have a bunch of cool stuff going on.